Do we have too much government?
We need to put people ahead of corporate profits.
This system is so lopsided. This threat is a real threat to democracy.
And I think that's really important. That's something we haven't been doing in this country for a long time.
Where do you start? What do you do? How do you do it?
Access to Democracy and other Eagan community television programming is supported by Thomson Reuters, makers of Westlaw Next and based in Eagan. Through Westlaw Next and other innovative online services, Thomson Reuters is the world's leading source of intelligent information for businesses and professionals. Online at thomsonreuters.com. And by U.S. Federal Credit Union, the member-owned financial institution offering service, value, and experience you can trust to the greater Twin Cities community.
Welcome. Access to Democracy is back. Alan Miller is back, but more important than that, the next congressman of the 2nd District, hopefully, Mike Obermueller is back.
Thank you, Alan.
The last time you were here, you were, I think, a thespian. And it's actually your opponent who's dancing around the issues. So let's talk about Mike Obermueller and the 2nd Congressional District.
Well, thank you, Alan. I appreciate the chance to be back on the program, and I've had a pleasure of being here in multiple roles. This one, though, is very important, of course. We've got a lot of challenges facing our country.
The most important.
Yeah, perhaps that's the case. You know, this system that we've got in Washington now, where both parties seem focused mostly on fighting with each other rather than getting anything done, is a real problem. And we've got to change that. It's time for people to set aside the partisanship and actually get things done. And that's what I'm hoping to do. I'm hoping to be the independent voice that this district needs to make sure we can actually accomplish things. Because frankly, if you want to change the results we're getting out of Washington, we got to change the kinds of people we're sending there.
Well, when you were in the state legislature, you were a person who was able to deal with people on the other side of the aisle. So let's hope that that's what you can bring to Washington.
Yeah, I mean, it takes effort to do that. You have to build relationships with people, and you have to work hard to get across the aisle and talk to folks on the other side. And if you make that a focus, you can do it. Unfortunately, most of our congressmen and women have taken a different tack recently, and it's to stand with their party and not venture across the aisle. We have to do more of that.
Now, do I understand that your opponent, the incumbent, is one of the people who co-sponsored the very controversial forcible rape bill?
He did. He was on board with that bill even before the language changed to soften that up. And frankly, it's really difficult an issue to talk about. There's no.
That's the Todd Eagan bill.
Right.
That's the bill as to what degree of rape. And I think the president said it very well the other day. Rape is rape. It's criminal. Right. So a bill like this is ludicrous.
Yeah, I mean, and it's troublesome to think about someone trying to parse these things out. No one, I can't imagine any woman who's been through that would put any semantics on things. Frankly, it's disgusting to be thinking about the idea that you might want to be parsing that out and make that legitimizes some sort of rape. And it's not in my book anyway. We definitely need to respect women more than that.
Now, I know that you have a somewhat conservative approach to budgeting, or maybe we'll call it a good sense approach to budgeting. But the fact of the matter is that your opponent called Paul Ryan one of the sharpest and brightest economic minds in the Congress. So do you want to talk to that and talk to the Ryan budget?
Sure.
And what it would do to us?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's just a difference of approach between what Congressman Klein wants to do and what I want to do. He really has a top-down approach. He wants to give some breaks to the folks at the very top and with the hope that eventually they'll throw some help down to the middle class. And I think that our best approach to getting back on track with our economy is to have a strong middle class. And that's what I'll be fighting for. And the Ryan budget really epitomizes kind of that dynamic where it is. Those budgets between 2011 and 12 essentially would shift the tax burden onto middle class families to give even bigger tax breaks to the wealthy. Seniors pay, for example, $6,400 a year more for Medicare benefits, so that the millionaires and billionaires can pay on average $265,000 a year.
And where are the
less in
seniors
taxes.
supposed to get that $6,400
Right,
from?
and that's exactly the point. I mean, the problem with shifting the burden onto the middle class is it actually slows the economy back down. Instead of people having a few dollars in their pocket to go out and use in their local stores, and that using those dollars in our local stores causes demand for job growth and for the services and the goods being provided. It essentially dries that up, and that's where those are the real job creators, the middle class. And so we've got to have a different approach if we're going to be successful here, and it means making sure we protect important middle class priorities like Medicare and Social Security from those who want to privatize them and turn them into vouchers.
Well, speaking of privatizing, didn't the congressman advocate privatizing Social Security several years ago?
He has on several occasions made comments.
What would have happened when we went into the crash?
Yeah.
If people had privatized Social Security, they would have nothing.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can imagine how bad it is if people have looked at their 401ks. If your whole investment for your retirement had been tied up just in the private market, you'd have been in a lot of trouble if we had privatized that. And I think that was a short-sighted view to think about that. These are programs that they're not giveaways; they're things we've paid for, and the people who've gotten there are they're promises that we've made to our seniors and ourselves, and we've got to protect them.
Yeah, I wrote an article a couple of years ago saying that Social Security is not an entitlement. You're paying in all your working life into this system. The government has your money, the government uses your money, the government makes interest on your money, and when it comes to getting Social Security, you're only getting back part of what you paid in. That's not an entitlement.
Right. That's essentially what these programs are for. They're to make sure that we have the financial security, and in the case of Medicare, the health security that it takes that you've worked for your whole life. And so, I think there's a big contrast between the approach that Congressman Klein would like to take and the one I think we ought to do. We ought to be shoring up that program, making sure we reduce the fraud and waste that exists. That you probably know, Ellen, that the Government Accountability Office has said that there are literally tens of billions of dollars in fraud and waste in the Medicare and Medicaid system that have to come out. We have to find those bad actors and root that out. And you can make the system solvent by payment reform and reducing this fraud and waste, not turning it into a risky voucher system, which is what Congressman Klein has voted twice to do.
And he also has called for the repeal of the Affordable Care Act, which has become known as Obamacare, and which has helped so many families, so many college students, so many seniors, so many people who couldn't get insurance. Address that, really.
Yeah.
I'm speechless when I think of the approach of just saying blatantly, we've got to get rid of that.
Yeah, and it's not only just get rid of it, but get rid of it without really a plan to put something else in its place. The House has actually has taken more than 30 votes to repeal all or some of Obamacare, and it costs like $50-some million to take all that effort and basically run it through the process on something they know is never going anywhere, because obviously the president's never going to sign the repeal of Obamacare. The Senate's not going to do that, and so they've essentially been wasting this on political bills. And when you're voting to repeal this law, which frankly I didn't like everything in it, but if you vote to repeal it outright, you're voting to kick kids off their parents' insurance before they turn 26. You're voting to make seniors pay more for prescription drugs. You're voting to make it harder for people with pre-existing conditions to get the medical care that they need. And those are votes that just don't match up with the values of this district. People are entitled to have that coverage, and they should get that coverage. And we ought to be trying to fix the problems with the bill rather than just voting to wholesale repeal it.
And really, you were talking earlier about the trickle-down theory. Well, we've seen since Reagan that there is no trickle-down theory. It doesn't trickle down. The money does not trickle down from the top to create jobs. The money at the top stays at the top in investments and really increasing the wealth of the people who have it. What we have to do, as you mentioned, is get the middle class in a position where the jobs are available to them, small business can really increase and pay their workers and offer them affordable health care.
Right. I mean, that ought to be our job going forward, is to really look at how we build a strong middle class. Because frankly, with a strong middle class, you're going to see the job growth that you need and the opportunities for people to move up. You know, some folks with this kind of top-down model that they're talking about are essentially saying, once I'm up, I want to pull the ladder up behind me. I think we ought to send down some more ladders and help more people get into the middle class. That's going to be better for our economy, and it certainly is. You know, it's all driven by making sure we've got the right workforce and making sure we've got an education system that trains the kinds of workers we're going to need in the 21st century economy. That's how you build that middle class and how you sustain it going forward.
Now, yours is a really interesting story. Talk about somebody who came really from humble background. You were one of 6 adopted children, raised on a farm in Wisconsin. You worked your way through college. You worked your way through law school, and you won awards in both. I think you graduated with high honors in college and a bunch of awards in law school. You went to work in the private sector once you got out of law school. Tell us a little bit about your background, because I think it's a humble background that really relates to what you're trying to say about the middle class.
Sure. Well, I mean, you know, as you mentioned, I grew up on a little farm, and my mom was an elementary school teacher. And so I learned pretty early on the value of hard work and community and a quality education. I was, you know, had the pleasure of meeting my wife Sarah on the first day of school in college rather, and we got married and started raising a family. So the whole time I'm working my way through college and law school, I've got 2 little boys, and we're raising a family. And now they're teenagers themselves. One's a freshman in college, and the other is a junior in high school. And you know, we understand what middle class families are facing and the challenges they have to go through.
I might mention.
Right, in public schools. And we understand what the challenges that middle class families are going through, because we've been through them. There were, you know, early on in those college years, there were Christmas time where it was, if it wasn't meant for friends and family, there's questions whether we would have been eating. I mean, we started from humble stuff, and we've had a chance because of the fact that there's been good student loan programs, because there's good college opportunities for us, because I had great family in behind me and friends. We were able to be successful and have this great opportunity now to have the chance to represent the district. We wouldn't have done that alone, and we couldn't have done it alone.
And all those things you're talking about, such as college loans or Pell Grants, are things that are really threatened by the Republican platform and by the philosophy of the incumbent congressman.
Yeah, certainly the approach of trying to eliminate the role that those important programs, especially college affordability programs, play has been a big issue. But it's broader than that, because we still have to figure out how we're setting priorities in our government. I mean, there's no question that both parties share some of the blame for the fact that we've got a lot of spending going on and not as much focus in on the things that really, really matter. And so I think we really do have to cut through all that and find ways to work together to set our proper priorities and then fund our priorities that make sense. And that's really what I would like to be working on.
And you live here in Eagan. You've raised your family. As I mentioned, the boys went to public school. You're very active with St. Thomas Becket, and the family certainly has participated there. So you've really got roots down in this area, and you have had roots down in this area.
Yeah, I mean, I think
a number of years.
Yeah, I think, you know, one of the things about my personality is I can't sit on the sideline while there's things that have to be done, and so that's why about coaching youth basketball, even though my boys are long out of those programs. I've, you know, coached several teams. I've been involved in the booster clubs at school and our church groups and so forth. I just think when there's work to be done, someone's got to step up to do it. I'm often one of the folks who want to do that. And now I'm looking at our Congress and I'm seeing how broken the system is. And I think it's time for us to have a change in the kinds of people we send there. So I'm not going to sit on the sidelines. I'm going to step up and try to do the work that needs to be done.
Well, let's talk about education and the need for good education and the availability for good education. The congressman headed, among other things, the Education Subcommittee, and what has he done for No Child Left Behind, other than leave behind a lot of children?
Yeah, I mean, obviously this is a big issue for Minnesota, who's had to go out and get a waiver from this program so we can get our kids back on track. The congressman has agreed with me that the No Child Left Behind law needs to go. Unfortunately, instead of working with a bipartisan committee that he has, he's instead put out just purely partisan work and bills that clearly cannot get the attention of even the members on his committee, much less the Senate and the President.
So in other words, rhetoric instead of results.
Right, and I think that's, you know, it's a big challenge that we have to do. We've got to get our give our teachers the tools they need to be successful here. Our federal role in education ought to be to set high standards and high expectations for our kids and our teachers, but we ought to be working in our local schools on how to make sure we move kids along, to make sure that our teachers have their hands untied from these arbitrary tests that are not doing their job to really bring our kids along, and instead be moving every kid as far along from point A to point B as they can each school year. And No Child Left Behind has been what maybe started out as a good idea, or at least aspirational, but it's not done the job, and it's time for it to go. And frankly, it's something that bipartisan support should have been able to be found for, but Congressman Klein has instead done some politically motivated bills instead.
Should government be involved with telling women how they can use their bodies, how they can deal with their doctors, or should government stay out of that altogether? I mean, Republicans talk about less government, except that they want to control women.
Yeah, I mean, I trust women to make choices for themselves, and I'm no fan of abortion, and as I don't think anyone really is, but we ought to be working towards reducing the number of abortions in our country and letting the decision about that be made between a woman and a doctor, and hopefully a supportive family, rather than letting the government decide these kinds of things. And that's it's a contrast. We ought to be working towards fewer abortions, and frankly a lot of other choices. Congressman Klein is one of the folks who was a sponsor of an amendment to make it so that some businesses could and insurance companies could exclude care for women who want to get contraceptives out of their plans, and essentially making it so that somebody else making a choice as to whether a woman can get that kind of health care. And those aren't decisions that ought to be made by our government.
And the fact of the matter is that health care is really an abomination as it presently exists, made so much better by the Affordable Care Act, and yet Klein fought that right down the line.
Yeah, and he's still fighting the changes that were made in Obamacare, but the reality is we do have to do some more work with regard to the cost control side of things, and I do think that we can definitely make some steps forward. We ought to be paying doctors to help keep people healthy rather than just paying them for services as they go along. We ought to be incentivizing best practices that not only make things more efficient and more make people healthier, but can actually have the kind of impact on cost controls that we want to have. And so those are the things we ought to be doing, is fixing the challenges that we have with the law, rather than basically wasting political time and making political moves on this kind of a repeal setup.
The Bush tax cuts are coming up, actually not for renewal, but really to end at January 1st. The Bush tax cuts ensure that the upper class, the highest income earners, pay less than their fair share. Should they be allowed to expire?
Well, look, I think we have to protect the middle class in order to get our economy and the economic growth that we've started to have here. We're going to have to protect the middle class. So I don't think we ought to be raising taxes on the middle class right now. But I'll tell you, there is a role to play for the folks at the very top end. There's no excuse for a CEO of a big company to pay less in taxes in terms of a percentage as his or her secretary does. And the classic Buffett rule issue, so I think there's a role to play there. I mean, we have to get our budgets under control first. That's the biggest primary thing we have to do. And then if there's a role, we need additional dollars in the system, we ought to talk about it. And the folks at the very top end are folks that can help with that. And I think that we've really seen a big fight and essentially folks holding the middle class hostage because they don't want to give any more taxes to the folks at the very top end. But those aren't folks that are going to create jobs just because they've got a few extra tax dollars in their pocket. They're going to the extent they're helping to create jobs, it's because they have demand for the services in their companies, and that means you got to have a strong middle class to make that work.
Now, the wars that we have been involved in literally are sucking the blood not only out of our finest and our bravest, but out of the economy. Where do you stand on, say, Afghanistan? Iraq is behind us now, basically.
Yeah, I mean, we spent a lot of money on those two wars, and frankly, we put them on the credit card rather than paying for them up front. And as a result, we've basically added a whole ton of money to our national debt, and with basically not much to show for it now. There's no way we can just stand up and leave from Afghanistan in the next few days. It's going to take a transition that makes it safe for the civilians that are in harm's way there now because of the war that's been going on. But I'm very glad to hear both of our presidential candidates talking about getting folks home by the end of 2014. I think we can definitely do that and really get those troops home with their families. Just as it ought to be the last thing we do to pull the trigger on and put troops in harm's way. And over the last decade, we've seen too often where we've gone in before we've exhausted the political things and the economic things that we could do to help influence other countries. Instead, we've been in pulling the trigger a little too fast. And I'd like to see us use force as a last resort rather than a second or third thing to think about.
What about energy? A comprehensive plan really on energy so that we can not only utilize fossil fuels, but the new world that's opening up.
Yeah, I don't think there's any question that in the short term we're going to have in all of the above strategy, all the things that we're using now we're going to continue to use in the short term, the next 10 to 20 years. But we really have to be thinking about what we're going to be in the future on this issue. And there's no question that we need to get energy independence in this country. Because when we're buying the fuel we need from countries that don't like us very much, we're essentially setting ourselves up to be in a bad position when we want to try to cut our ties with those groups or put economic sanctions in place or something like that. So I think it's really important for us to take the next steps forward on really building a renewable energy economy and really doing that. Now there's good benefits on the energy side, of course. We'll have all this renewable energy, but it can also spur some really good innovations going forward in other industries.
And create a lot of jobs.
And create a lot of jobs and really put people to work. And so this is the time for the government to play a role, especially on the research side, to make sure that there are funds available for folks who want to take what we've got now and make the next big thing. Not just incremental steps, but really explode this industry and make something happen. And we shouldn't be picking the winners and the losers, whether it's wind versus solar versus whatever. But we ought to be looking for the best ideas and making sure that those opportunities are there for the entrepreneurs who are trying to push those forward.
Now, you were raised on a farm. Our agriculture policy has been under a lot of fire. What can we do to make the agricultural policy fair, not only for the farmers, but for the population?
Well, we have to pass a farm bill. It's frankly embarrassing to know that the U.S. House came home and took a 2-month vacation so these guys could all come and campaign rather than getting their job done. The farm bill passed the Senate with broad bipartisan support. It passed out of a House committee, 35 to 11, I think, broad bipartisan support. Can't get to the floor of the House for a vote.
And why can't it get to the floor of the House?
And it's because pure partisanship. There are folks who won't accept the amount of the nutritional program that's in there, essentially the food stamp program. There are some folks who don't want to do the cuts to the direct payments to farmers that are in those bills. And I'll tell you, our farm policy ought to be about making sure that farmers, especially in Minnesota, that I care very deeply about, know what the ground rules are for their next couple of years. They have the security of an insurance program, so if they have a bad year through something they can't control, like drought, like we're facing now.
We certainly suffered from that this year.
Right, that they know that they've got the dollars to put crops back in the ground next year, because of course we all want that around. We want those foods to be in our shelves down the line, and we want it to be there. So we have to give them that security. But we shouldn't be paying direct subsidies to farmers who aren't even farming. Some of there's examples where people aren't even putting crops in the ground and they're collecting these direct payments. That's not acceptable. And this farm bill would have fixed some of those things, and it can't even get to the floor because there's all this political fighting about it.
Well, that would be Eric Cantor or Boner or one of the others.
Yeah, I mean, this is, and it's probably not even just them. It's the folks that are in their caucus who don't want to see some of these programs done. I mean, you think about what our food stamp program, or the nutritional folks now, is that nutritional title. Most of that money goes to kids under 3 who are hungry, or 65 and older who are hungry. And so it's not like food stamps are being just doled out to anybody who wants them. And these are hungry people, and they're usually at the edges of life. And we need to really focus in on the things that didn't used to be political, but have become political here because these guys want to fight all the time rather than get along. And we need to put better people in Washington who understand that the focus ought to be on the solution, not on the fight.
One of the great shames of this country is that 1 out of 5 or 6 families is below the poverty line now. I mean, in the greatest country in the world, that's not only unacceptable, but to me that's just outrageous.
Yeah, and we can't continue to treat folks that are in that category as a political football, which is what we've essentially done over the last 4 to 5 years, and actually even going back in the last decade. Instead, we ought to be working on policies that help them be successful themselves, and to recognize that there's a community role to play here. That no one's doing it all by themselves. We should be doing it together and helping those. Sending the ladders down so people can get the education that they need to move up and to better their families. Making sure that there are good job retraining programs so that people can get the jobs that are available today and train for the jobs that we're going to need for tomorrow. Those are big challenges, and we should. If they're not going to focus on it, then we're going to continue to have the problem. If you are going to focus on it, we can solve these challenges.
And in the little bit of time we have left, one of the things that's really troublesome to me is that we send young people off to war, and then we bring them home and treat them as second-class citizens. We don't really honor our veterans. We don't really take care of them the way we should. There should be something done about that. They're putting their lives on the line, and then we walk away from them, we turn our back. That's unpardonable. Yeah,
and there are certainly been a lot of politicians who've stood up and done a lot of good things for our troops while they're in their field, but they don't do as much attention paying as they should when they come back home, and that's been a real challenge for us. And certainly I've seen that with the congressman as well on this point. That we have to.
And he's a former serviceman. That's
right.
What I can't understand about that.
I know he cares about our troops and he cares about our veterans. But you need policies in place to help put these folks back to work. We need to make sure that they transition back into society and that they have an opportunity to be very successful. We've taken them out of their normal lives and put them in harm's way, and now we're asking them to transition back in by themselves. And it's a real problem for us. There should have been a much bigger GI Bill. There should have been some opportunities for retraining, putting a lot of these skills that are transferring in. If you're a construction worker over in Iraq or Afghanistan, you ought to be able to come back over here and get those skills. Or if you have electrician work over there, you ought to be able to get the license here and make those things more seamless. It's just we really come down to a system where we haven't focused in on the right kinds of things, and that's when you've got this kind of fighting and you've got a voice where people are taking a partisan approach as opposed to an independent voice like I want to take. It's time to make a change, and that's why after a decade in Washington, it's time for John Klein to come home and for the 2nd Congressional District to be represented by an independent voice who understands our values. That's what
and the name of that voice is Mike Obermueller, candidate for Congress, 2nd Congressional District. In the final minute, do you have any word for the viewers and your constituents?
Yeah, I'll just say that if Washington is broken, we got to have a solution, and I'm going to be part of that solution that goes forward. This is our window of opportunity to put real representation, someone who can be an independent voice and who can actually find solutions and work with both parties to get there. We can't shift the burden onto the middle class. We've got to make sure we're strong and we protect those middle class priorities like Medicare and Social Security, and that's what I'll work on when I get there.
Mike, I wish you the very best.
Yeah, thank you very much.
And thanks for coming in here and sharing with us. I know your schedule is really hectic, and we appreciate the fact that we were able to get you on before the election so that people will see this and remember the name Mike Obermueller for Congress.
Thank you, Alan. I appreciate it.
Thank you.